again, Professor Foster, for agreeing to do this for us. And over to you now. We can take maybe 30 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we'll open the floor up to questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to sort of talk to you all, and I think the best way that we proceed is I'll spend some time and maybe give you an overview of the process of admission, sort of how that looks, and but I think I'm very happy to take your specific questions, whatever is interesting of interest to you, and so forth. Certainly, I think we're aware that there are applicants who come out of sort of top U.S. universities who have a very clear lots of clear information about the process and know how to sort of prepare things in a way that's very useful to them. And perhaps it gives them an inside track. But I want to say from the outset that that Brown and really any top economics program, we're looking for the best candidates from around the world, and I think the real challenge that we face is trying to identify those candidates, because some of the things that sort of make each of you special and would make you a great candidate in economics may be more difficult to communicate. And so hopefully, through this discussion, you can get some idea of how someone, like me, I serve as the director of admissions at Brown. And But my understanding is I'm not just telling you to come to Brown, which of course I wish that you would all apply, and I hope you will be accepted. But really, this is about more broadly. And frankly, there isn't very much difference across most of the top programs in terms of sort of how they proceed, how they evaluate candidates. The evaluation of candidates at Brown is very highly correlated with the candidates at most other schools. And so I think the processes are quite similar. There are some differences in terms of how financial aid is handled, or how waiting lists are maintained, and that kind of thing, which I'm happy to go through. Um, I should also say that if you're thinking about applying in January, this is an extraordinary year in so many ways, and that's certainly the case on the admissions process. As probably some of up until about 2 weeks ago, the Brown Economics Department did not think it was having a class that was being admitted. But after some further discussion with the provost and about the consequences of that, both for the program, but also for the many things that graduate students at Brown, it was agreed that we could in fact have an entering class. It'll be a little bit smaller than it will be in some other places. But that's our understanding of almost all of the sort of top 20 schools would be, that if their classes may be 60-70% of what would normally be the case. And it's partly because of financial difficulty. I think it's mostly because there are some students whose research in their fifth or sixth year was really compromised by COVID, and that's especially true in the field of development where I work, and that some of the students will need an extra couple of years, and just to keep the sort of overall size of the graduate cohorts manageable, the sort of entering class needs to be a bit smaller. Um, I just, I want to be upfront about that. We frankly, that's what's happening on the demand side. On the supply side, we have no idea. My expectation is that, the sort of the number of applications will be roughly similar to what it's been in past years. So it'll be a little bit more competitive for all of you. But I don't want any of you to feel discouraged about applying because of the circumstances. I mean, I think we're planning to have a class, and hopefully by next fall, everything will be in person, and it'll be pretty much back to the way things have been done, with perhaps some of the lessons of the last couple of years about our ability to do things virtually and to have students in the field and so forth, sort of change as a result of the experience. But anyway, I think the main message is I don't want you to feel too discouraged. The other thing I'd say, sort of upfront, as long as I'm talking about kind of COVID related things, is that we've had quite a number of people who, for various reasons, have said that they haven't been able to sort of take the GRE or fill some other sort of aspect of the application. I think, sort of our policy is we do require the GRE, but we understand that some people, it may be delayed in coming in, or they may not be able to do it all. And, I think that'll put you at a disadvantage relative to the best programs if you're unable to sort of submit a GRE score, but it's not going to cause us to sort of reject it out of course. But you're going to be at a disadvantage if you don't have a GRE score. So I would, and if it doesn't come in by the official deadline for Brown, if it can come in 2 or 3 weeks after that, it still can be sort of accounted for. So I think that's. But you may have more specific questions about that. But let me now move on to sort of, I think, what I would say if this were a normal year. I think maybe the best way to sort of talk about it is sort of think about it from the perspective of a place of my job. So Brown University, we get about 750 applications a year, and we're admitting a class in a typical year of about 15 students. And so that makes my job pretty hard. We have 750 applications. We try to, we look at every single one of them, and then spend most of our effort on the ones that look most competitive. Um, and um, and so they come in the door, and we have a team of 5 or 6 people, and then we just basically take the applications and assign them to different readers. We try to do it by region or by school, so that one person is, say, looking at all the applications from India, or at least from Delhi School, for example. Um, so that person can do some interpersonal comparison and maybe take the best people. And so that's kind of a fairly quick reading. But because we're dealing with 750 applications, we have to read them all in about 2 weeks. Um, and and so that's sort of an initial filtering. We do a fair bit of sort of processing of the numerical data at that stage. Nothing is kind of definitive, but certainly if there are one thing that is most critical is, in terms of that initial sorting, is the quantitative GRE. Our students do extremely well. That the ones that we admitted, and obviously math is a critical aspect of being successful in an economics graduate program. We understand that the math GRE is not a perfect measure of your ability to do the kind of math that you do in a graduate program in economics. But it's a very helpful kind of first screen. Again, there's no particular cutoff. We're always looking at an application kind of holistically. Math GRE is not so good, the other ones are good, and it may cause us to look a little more deeply at the math courses that you've taken. Have you taken the sort of higher math that would suggest that you're extremely well prepared for a graduate program, and so forth. So even in the first stage, we're trying to look at things holistically, but it is clear that one of the things that sort of is going to be important early on is going to be your GREs in general, but the math GRE in particular. So we do this first screening, and basically the students are going to be ranked based on that preliminary screening, and it's sort of on a 1 to 10 scale. And it's sort of then the applications in the top 4 or 5, or top, let's say, usually 6 to 10 or so, we will then have a second reading, and so it'll go to another person on the committee, and they'll kind of work through it. And it's that stage, and then all that information comes back to me as the graduate director, and most of the work from there is really sort of my responsibility. But I do get input along the way of the committee, and so people are, each member of the committee is assigning scores. They probably weight things slightly differently. I think the set of things that people look at, there's a sort of look at the GREs, and some people pay more attention to that, some less. Where the school that you're from is, I think, of some importance. We tend to, there are some schools where that we've had some good experiences with in the past, and we have some inside information perhaps, and that can be useful, so that's important. As transcripts are, we look through the transcripts. We pay a lot of attention to, have you done the kind of proper math preparation to be successful in a GRE? Do you have good grades all around and so forth? So we evaluate those. And then the next piece is just really the how do we deal with the letters and the personal statement. The letters, I think that I think the real challenge of the letters is that different faculty write different kinds of letters. Some people say that all their students are the very best students they ever had, and maybe that's true, but it's probably not. I think the biggest problem is often we get letters from people that we don't know very well, and so we don't really have a sense of sort of how they write letters and so forth. But we're looking for in the letters sort of evidence that this person, first of all, this person knows you, they have a sense of who you are, they know. They know what you want, what a PhD program is, and a PhD program in economics. They have some sense of your research ability and so forth. I have to say, getting letters from people that are important is not really going to help you all that much unless you know those people very well, and the letters reflect that. Obviously, when I see a letter from somebody who I know personally, or I've had some contact with, or whose research I have looked at, I'll certainly, pay more attention to that perhaps than I might to others. But if the letter basically says I met this person at coffee, when they were visiting Delhi, that's not very useful information to me. So I think the bottom line is, the choice you have to make is, find letter writers that know you well and who know economics well, and let them just go ahead and write about you. I think, as I said, the importance of letters varies a lot, and it partly varies based on what other credentials you have. You have top JREs, you come out of a top U.S. college, for example. Uh, it probably letters may not be so important as whether you've had real research experiences, and but in other cases, they may be more important. So it's going to vary a fair bit, and certainly, if a faculty is writing for multiple students and they try to rank those students implicitly for us, that's very helpful. Obviously, that's really out of your control as applicants, but it is just beyond. I wanted to be honest about how that process works. Is to the extent possible, we do try to think about groups of candidates within a particular setting and school, so that we're sort of comparing as much as possible, apples to apples. On the other hand, throughout this, we're really looking for. We want to build a class. Okay, we want to build, and what that means to us is that we want a distribution of different countries. And, we've had some experiences where we have all the students from one particular country, and I don't think that's very good for the students. I mean, I think one of the, it's not good on a variety of ways. It's not good for the other students sometimes because the other students might feel excluded. And But I just think one of the greatest parts about being in a PhD program is to have people from all the world coming together with a kind of similar goal, learning from each other, perhaps working together. And so we're very much interested in a class that comes from all over the world and represents all kinds of different backgrounds in terms of their upbringing and so forth. And that is, I think, really an important sort of aspect of that. A second thing that we're looking for is we're looking for a variety of fields. So we have within the department, we sort of divide ourselves into sort of groups to some extent. We have a theory group and have a econometrics group and a sort of macro group and applied micro group. The applied micro group, of course, has its different fields: labor, public, and so forth. And so one of my jobs, and it's frankly a hard job, is to kind of read the applications and kind of guess, well, is this person going to sort of fit into this category? um, you know Last year, for the first time, we had, and maybe some other schools have it as well, we allowed you to kind of check a field, and to some extent it helps our thinking about the process, and making sure that your application is perhaps read by at least one specialist in that area from within the committee. So if you check the macro box, one macro guy is going to get a chance to read read your application. Obviously there's within economics, there's no commitment involved in that. I mean, you can check the macro box, and if you find you really love econometrics, well, that's great. Once you get here, we're not channeling it all. You're coming into class. You're all coming at the same slate, but we are trying to make some guesses about, like, how do we balance the class. And so, you know, so you can think about, well, is there, if you do have some interest in a field that might be relatively, scarce or hard to find, and you have the qualifications to do that, you might sort of think about pointing yourself in that direction. So econometrics, it's hard. We have occasionally really great econometric students in our classes, but I don't suggest that all of you just take econometrics, because then we'll let you into Brown, because you really have to show, to the econometricians in our committee, that in fact you have the sort of the chops, the ability, the background that you can be successful in econometrics. So think about, the relationship between those things. But we're looking for balance on that. We're looking for balance on gender, ethnicity, and so forth. So all those things are going to be important. Okay. Then then I think, the last thing, at least the last thing that you have, some control over, and I think people agonize a lot over, would be the personal statements of, in the application. I work with my students on those to some extent, my undergraduate students who are applying to graduate school. And I think, maybe the best way to think about writing a personal statement is that what I'm looking for is that you have the kind of qualities that I think make for a good graduate student. Okay. Now, by sort of a discussion of, who you are, what you've researched, and so forth. I think, the fact that you have a good sense of what economic research is, it's important that you've actually done some economic research. You sort of, maybe perhaps as a researcher or whatever, but you have an idea of what an economic question is and what the tools are and so forth. I think that's important. I think having a personal statement that's coherent, it sort of, in some sense tells a narrative. It's not just, 3 snapshots. Um, you know, I did this research, I did that research, I did that research. It makes it hard for me to kind of get a picture of who you are and what you might be interested in, and it feels a little slipshod. Um, on the other hand, if you can sort of, say, I worked on this project, and based on this project, I started working on this project, and then I wrote a paper from this class, and it was sort of related in this way. You can tell a kind of coherent narrative. Again, it doesn't commit you to follow that particular line of work, but it makes it easier to sort of get a picture of who you are, the kind of work you do. I actually had an interesting exchange with one of my students last night. So she sent me her personal statement, and I thought it was it was quite good. She's had some really good research experience. One of the things she talked about was her thesis, and she sort of, I think it was an impressive job. She'd taken some real initiative. She'd worked to get some data that was very hard to get. She finally got it, and so forth. So that part was good. But when I read through it, I sort of said, one thing I don't get from this essay that you've written is, like, how did you come up with this idea? Okay. And so then she wrote back to me and she said, well, I took this class, and in this class I wrote this proposal, about sort of, it was in this case about environmental health. And then she came to work with me as a thesis, and I asked her to bring in some papers that she really liked. And then she sort of realized that one of the papers really excited her. And then she said, well, and then based on that paper, she was able to kind of come up with a kind of a new and creative way of sort of doing the same thing, but doing it in a different way, with a different form of identification and different structure and so forth. And none of that was in the application. I said, that's what I'm looking for, because what I'm trying, I asked her to put that in the application, because I think, these days many students come in with very strong empirical skills, maybe some field research skills, which are valuable to a development economist and so forth. I think, and very strong technical skills and all that sort of thing. I think, the hardest thing to judge is who is going to have a creative idea and be able to run with it. Who has the creativity and the curiosity to sort of, take an idea and really think about, here's a new way of approaching this problem, a new way of thinking about this issue, and then obviously working really hard to put that idea into place. It's that sort of creativity and curiosity, which is the sort of scarcest commodity in my view among graduate students. And if you can make that come to life in your personal statement, I think you'll have a leg up on other candidates. So anyway, so I think that I've sort of chatted on for 20-25 minutes. I think maybe the best thing now would be to open it up to see what questions you have. You're willing to ask me anything. If it's something I can't answer, I will tell you so. Don't feel embarrassed about that. And I'm sure that if you have a question, I think many of the other people in the room will also have a similar question. So I don't know, Urshi, what the best way to manage this. I'm happy with people just maybe the way we could use the raise hand function, and
Yeah.
I'll just call them as I see them in the participant window.
Okay. Yeah. We've already asked people to post their questions in the chat box. So
Okay.
Aditi and I are sort of sifting through them. But if we can also make it more interactive and people can use the raise hand function.
Do you want to sort of summarize any of the questions from the chat that you think I should
Um,
look at? I could read them
y-
myself, but since you've been looking.
yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. So there's one question, Avram, she has, who is asking about the AWA score on the GRE. And I guess additionally, I could add about the verbal score on the GRE, how important that is. And if you get a low score on these two aspects of the GRE, should you retake it?
So I mean, I think the key answer is, obviously having a better score is better. Um, uh, and it depends on sort of how the rest of your application looks. We certainly do understand with verbal questions that people for whom English is not a first language, they're not going to do as well. And so, certainly it's not surprising, to see that some of the verbal scores, or maybe to some extent the analytic questions, because they involve more sophisticated language in some cases, we're willing to sort of accept that. We do, obviously for foreign language students, the TOEFL is critical, and the graduate school watches that like a hawk. So if your
Mhm.
TOEFL is below, so I mean, every year there's 4 or 5 students who the graduate school says, how come you admitted this person? Their TOEFL score was blank, was below our thing, and I would have to go back and say, well, look, this person looks really good, and they clearly have experience with English. Based on various reasons, maybe they studied in California for a semester or something like that, and then I always win the argument. But the TOEFL score is useful for sort of base language ability. I think so to some extent. Uh, there's going to be flexibility and there's going to be variety. A student who does not so well in the math GRE and has top other scores, if not well in the GRE, is a 75th, 80th percentile, and the others are very top scores, then that's a person I would take seriously. Again, if it fits with the whole application, right? So what I want to kind of get away from is the idea that there is any kind of cutoff on any kind of dimension that makes you more or less competitive. Obviously, better scores are better. And sometimes retaking an exam you can do better. Although, frankly, my experience just looking at scores and so forth is, yeah, you can do a little better, but it usually doesn't change very much. And even with some prep, it really doesn't. I mean, I think it's remarkably robust. So, you take it again, it's almost sampling error, whether it's up or down. So I wouldn't sort of just assume that you can do better the next time round and so forth. But I wouldn't also assume that having a low score is the kiss of death in terms of admissions, right? It's going to be in balance, with everything else you do, what your letter writers say, what your personal statement looks like, whether you've done the right kind of coursework, and so forth. That's going to be more important than any particular score, other than possibly the quantitative GRE, which gets a pretty high weight regardless.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of questions that sort of have the same flavor. So I'm going to put them together. Pushkar, Sabha, and Ashwin are asking, they don't have a master's in economics or background in economics. Like Sabah is an engineer from IIT. So how is it that they can write an application?
um, well, I think there's a couple parts of that question. The first, which I probably should have said something about, is that
And
these
it's
days,
harder for them to.
a lot of candidates, who apply, particularly international candidates, have already done a master's program, in
Mm.
economics, taking essentially the same coursework, maybe not at the same level as we do in our first year. Okay, um, you know, I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, why are you wasting 2 years of your life? On the other hand, it's an extraordinarily useful signal of how well you'll do in our program, at least in the first year. And so, having a master's from an international program is certainly, I think, an advantage for some students. With that said, we certainly do not require that you have an economics background, and I'm delighted to hear that you're an engineer. I was a civil engineer coming out of college, and ended up in an economics PhD program. Yeah, and I think that there there are a couple of there are a few things that we look at, and my colleague David Weil was a history major, right? So many of us did actually come out of other departments. I think there are a couple of things that you need to think about. The first is the sort of do you have the quantitative skills that an economist needs? And I think for many, particularly the person coming from engineering school, almost surely that's not an issue, right? And so that's obviously if you came from history, we might look at that twice, but you know, it is possible to show that you have strong mathematical ability, even though if you come out of some other sort of non-economic social science or humanity. Um, so there's that. I think the second thing, which is probably more of a limitation or more of an issue, is the extent to which you kind of understand or you can write, your personal essay reflects an understanding of what economic research is for. I guess what I would say about that is if you're in an engineering program, you're thinking about applying to graduate school in economics, you must have a reason, right? There must be something that you're curious about or some exposure to economics and so forth, and you should be able to highlight that in some way in your personal essay, um, so that even though you can't say, well, I did a research experience, working on some randomized trial in some India. I mean, you probably don't have that, but you can give people a sense that you're curious about economic issues, you understand what an economic PhD involves. Maybe you've looked a little bit into maybe some relevant literature and so forth. So I think you have a little bit more of a stretch, but I would not want you to think about, just because you don't have an economics master's or even or an economics bachelor's, that you necessarily will be thrown out the window. You just have to show that in fact you meet the criteria that I suggested, and it's going to be a little more difficult for you because it's not going to be so very obvious as it might be for some other people. Does that address the issue?
Yep, yep. I guess like relatedly, we just got another question from Naveen, and he's asking how important is the reputation of the college from which you have a master's degree while applying. And I guess like something, Andrew, that we were discussing before is also how it may not be possible for everyone, especially members of our collective, to say apply for a master's in the UK or I don't know France or Barcelona, which is typically programs in which scholarships are also hard to get. So maybe I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say, I mean, certainly, having a master's in a sort of reputable, credible program that's placed, other students in top U.S. universities is an advantage. I mean, I was thinking about letters. If your letter writer says, I've had many students in this program, and my best students went to Princeton and Stanford, and this student's as good as them, that's going to be gold. And but obviously you can't all aspire to that, and it won't be true for most of you, and so forth. And so I think beyond the sort of very best programs, it probably doesn't matter that much what the sort of overall quality is. I think we recognize this person as a master's. It does help if it's a program that we know nothing about. If you can say a little bit about the curriculum. I mean, for example, the sort of standard textbook is that everybody uses for their micro theory is the Maskell textbook. Was your textbook in your master's program? So maybe if you come from a sort of second year master's program, it might be helpful if you, or at least your advisors, and might emphasize the letter writers might spend a little time sort of describing the nature of the program so that we can see what kind of fit it is with the economics graduate school.
Thank you. We have a question from Rupali, who's in grade 11 right now. So she's asking if you have any tips for students applying for undergraduate programs in the US.
Well, uh, yeah, I guess, I mean, obviously the system in India is very different from in the US in many ways. In the US, typically you apply to just a university, not to like a narrow college and so forth. And so I'm probably not the best person to sort of speak to that. But I think the bottom line is the better the university you go to and the more successful you are, the more likely you are going to be able to get it, to be able to achieve a PhD at a top program. I think that's the sort of the axiom here. But I would also leave room for there's like there's also plenty of room for what we call Algernon stories in the United States, that people come from sort of humble backgrounds, humble undergraduate institutions and so forth, who through sort of sheer curiosity and will and skill are able to sort of go much farther than that. And so going to a serious undergraduate institution is important, and to some extent I would, one of the main reasons we go to college, and it's one of the reasons that the current circumstances are so, I think, difficult for a place like Brown, is because of the people that we spend time with, and they're gonna form who you are. And they're gonna form whether what you're excited about and so forth. And so going to a place where there are people who are like you, who you will enjoy being with, who will help stimulate you and make you better, is sort of what I would say you'd want out of an undergraduate program. But I don't know the details enough of every institution to say more than that.
Okay, thank you. I think these are all the questions that we have in the chat right now. So the
Okay.
floor is open for more questions.
Did anybody want to ask a question sort of verbally? Maybe, oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, Aditi has raised her hand.
Okay,
Aditi
go ahead. Unmute yourself and just ask.
asked to unmute. Um,
Yep, there you go.
yeah.
Hi. Thank you for the session. We are very happy that you have joined us today. I think the question that I have is this would be concern of most of the students who have joined us, Baujan economists, because uh, a lot of them come from not so privileged backgrounds. So getting score in masters become a little difficult, or if for that matter even undergrad. But so would you suggest that it is better for somebody to target a masters in say UK before applying for a PhD in US, or if the GRE score, quant score is good enough, then they can directly apply for PhD in US schools, given that the score in masters is not what it usually uh, is for most of the students who apply every year.
Yeah. No. I mean, I understand the dilemma. Um, I think if you have the sort of the quantitative GRE is sort of in the very top, that will get your application noticed, right? By at most schools, most economics graduate programs, and that's sort of a leg up. I think the key question I would ask in a case like that is what do you have in your background that will help us sort of understand your ability to be successful in the first year of the program, right? So I think that would be the concern. Obviously, the quality of the undergraduate institution that you're in is going to be important, and you know that you performed well. And maybe if the quality is not that high, if your letter writers are saying, you know, this is the best person that's come around in 10 years, and you know has sort of knocked the socks, to use a, I guess I don't know if that's an expression that you guys use, but knocked the socks off of any of the any of the economics courses they took, and they were also a double major in math, you know, then the master's is not going to be sort of all that necessary. You know, I guess the concern that I guess the point that I would make is if you have, you know, the kind of application that looks that way, there's a good chance you would get into Oxford with a fellowship, you know, or and so forth into a master's program, and so you know, um, I don't think it's a crazy option, at least to a limited extent, to apply, you know, to some economic graduate programs that you're interested in, apply to the master's programs, and then see what happens. And if you get into the master's program, then you could take that avenue. Or if you get into a kind of graduate program and want, you can take that avenue. And then you can make that choice sort of on a more rational basis. I think it's not, I guess what I'm saying is it's quite likely the people who are likely do well in the master's program may also do well in the economics graduate program, um, uh, in which case maybe there's no reason to do the master's. Um, but um, but you know, I think the sort of the idea that I have to do a master's first, um, it's helpful, but as I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a strong enough program to be successful there, you may well have a strong enough sort of application to be successful. Maybe not at the top 5 program, but maybe outside of that. And so it may be the best strategy is really to kind of diversify. And then, you know, once you have a choice, you can make a choice, right? If you come to me in January and say, I got into Brown and I also got into the master's program in Oxford, you know, should I come to Brown or should I go to Oxford for 2 years and then see if I can get into MIT? You know, that's an interesting debate to have, right? um, I'm not even sure what I would tell you, right? I mean, I'd love you to come here, I'm sure, but honestly, you might decide it's worth doing a master's with a chance of getting into a graduate program, a higher ranked graduate program down the road. But you know, that's where the decision would make sense when you have 2 options, you know, the master's program versus something else. Um, if you don't have either option, or you only have one option, you should take that choice.
Thank you. There's another question from Naveen, who's asking, and this may be relevant for everyone. Does Brown expect PhD applicants to have publications with reputed journals at the time of application?
No, no,
Okay.
no. We don't expect that. It's extremely rare
Right.
to see successful publications, even in not reputable journals. uh, yeah. No, we hope that by the time you finish your PhD, that you know that you have maybe one publication in a very good journal, and you know maybe another that you're about ready to send out for submission. But we certainly don't expect that coming in. And you know, I think that that you know um, we expect you to come to graduate school and learn stuff. And so if you already know what you know enough to write and publish things in top journals, why would you go to graduate school in economics?
Thank you for saying that. I feel like that's something I need to hear even during the PhD. I came here to learn. Uh, but like I think I have a follow-up question to that, which is would you consider publications in something like the EPW or OPED pieces? Like I know that a lot of the people here are already, you know, publishing reports from their surveys, etc., in newspapers or EPW for that matter.
So I would say I care less about the publication and more about the process, right? And so this is really about the personal statement, right? I mean, if you can say in your statement, because of something that happened, in my life, I got really interested in this particular problem. And so I wrote this, I did this research and I put together the, NSS data and I got this answer and then I was able to publish in the EPW. Like the most important part of that is like, I had an idea and I brought it to fruition. The fact that
Mhm.
EPW chose to publish it or not is probably, it's a nice thing. It's obviously a positive, but it's less important than what that narrative says about you as a creative and curious scholar.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then there is a question about scholarships in the US. So yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
important.
Okay. So this is that's one thing I would say where there is some variation across schools. So at Brown currently, every student is admitted with full funding for 5 years, and some flexibility beyond that. So Brown, and I think that's reasonably common, but it's not certainly universal. And in fact, several years ago at Brown, we had a program where we could admit students as master students on a paid basis, and if they did really well in the first year, they were allowed then admitted automatically into the PhD program. We no longer have that program, but I know Northwestern, for example, does. So I think those do sort of happen, and so there is an opportunity essentially to kind of come in the back door if you have the financial resources to be able to sort of do that. I think the view at Brown is that we don't want sort of financial resources to be the reason that you're at Brown. We want it to be about your ability and so forth. And I think with most of you around, who are at this talk, that may be front and center. And our as a consequence, our program may be a little bit smaller. Than it would be if and certainly than it was when we were allowed to take some master students. But I think there's certainly a potential trade-off there. So you have to look kind of school by school. At other schools, you're sort of admitted without any expectation of funding, and then, and you have to kind of figure it out. And then, or perhaps the very best students get fellowship offers, and the other ones are admitted, and it's up to them to kind of to see if they can manage it. Um, so, so, um, so there's going to be some sort of variability there. Um, I should say that the one sort of exception to that is if you have fellowship support from your country, right, a country or bank or whatever, that's we don't pay a lot of attention to it at Brown initially, but I think some schools do, and I know, for example, that the University of Pennsylvania this year has basically said they will only admit students who have that kind of support, external support, and so. Um, so by all means, if there's an opportunity to apply for a fellowship that will partly offset your time here, we'll be very happy about that. As I say, it won't be a big factor in the admissions decision, if at all, but frankly, it makes us very happy because it allows us to have a bigger program, right? We have pretty much a fixed budget constraint, and every person we bring in who has fellowship support allows us to bring in someone else. And we certainly recognize that, and there's various kind of incentives that are in place to encourage that. For example, if you bring in 1 year of support in your first year, you automatically are given access to a 6 year of support, right? So you still get the 5 years of support, it's just sort of delayed a bit. So I think so there's sort of that aspect. I did when and sort of talking about that, I was sort of reminded of one thing that I perhaps should have talked a little bit about, just because it's kind of a confusing process, is that admissions in economics tends to follow a very phased design. Okay. That is to say, we get applications in January, and our first letters go out in the middle of February. And this is pretty common across different programs. So we have a target class of, as I said, about 15 in most years. So typically that means that we'll send out about 45 acceptance letters in February. But then we'll also send out, maybe 50 or 60 waiting list sort of notifications. Okay. and 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 then as we get turned down as the sort of first group of students turn us down, and they turn us down quite frequently. Like, we give the best offers to the best students, and of course other programs see them as great too, and so we'll lose 70 or 80% of the first 45. um, and so then as the semester goes along, then we're able to extend offers to more and more people, always shooting for a class of 15. So I have this very complicated program that computes probabilities based on information that you provide us about your other alternative schools and so forth. And frankly, like 2 years ago, 10 people got letters of admissions on April 14th, and had to give us an answer April 15th, which is the formal deadline. Like, we couldn't give extensions beyond that according to the rules that we agree to play with across all universities. So that the waiting list business is kind of very, it's very complicated for you guys. It's also complicated for us. But I think the main message is there is a couple of things. First, if you get into a higher ranked program that you really want to go to, tell the other schools, I don't want to go. Turn them down early. Like, you're hurting other people, and if you do that, and you're making my life more complicated. So if you really have a strong preference for a school, there's no real advantage to you in sort of didding around. It's not going to increase your bargaining position, as far as I know, particularly with a higher ranked school, right? So do tell people. That's the first thing. Second, keep us informed. Now, we send you sort of questionnaires, both to waiting list and admitted people. What other schools do you get into? Perhaps where does Brown fit on that list? So we can make some assessment of the probability you come, and that also allows us to better, more accurately predict what will happen later on. And the third point is, when it gets to be April 1st or so, and you have a couple of schools where you're on the waiting list, be ready to make your decision, right? In other words, if you get an offer on April 14th, you're not going to have time to do much research, right? You need to be, by April 1, you say, okay, I got into, Maryland, and I'm on the waiting list at Brown and Michigan. By April 1, you need to have a plan, right? That if Michigan accepts me and Brown doesn't, I'll go there. If Brown accepts me and Michigan doesn't, I'll go there. If Brown and Michigan both accept me, then I'm going to go to Michigan or whatever, right? So you should be ready to go on April 1, because things happen very fast, and we don't want you to sort of lose an opportunity that you want to take because you sort of weren't ready to make a decision.
All right. We have one question from Pushkar, who wants to ask his question himself.
Sure.
So, Pushkar, if you want to unmute yourself. Okay.
Oh, Pushkar, there. Yes, I see him.
Yeah, he's here, but his mic is
Oh, there's
not.
somebody in the waiting room. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I admitted them.
Okay.
Okay, so he's basically Pushkar. I think I can ask on his behalf then. He has sent his profile. So he's an MA history student at the University of Delhi,
Yeah.
where he works on questions of economic history of India and labor history. And he has a very nice profile. Where he's worked with different organizations, Times of India, and has interviewed like really big personalities. So he's asking if and he wants to study caste conflicts in Delhi between 1930 to 2000. And he's wondering if that's a good profile that might be accepted at Brown.
Well, I think it's hard to say. I think the fact that you're passionate about a particular subject is going to be a plus for me. I think it's going to come across. I think the thing that we want to look for is really, do you want to come and study economics, or do you want to do something else, right? And so if you want to, if you're going to come to economics graduate school, it's because in principle you want to learn the tools that we teach, and you want to put them to work on the kinds of questions that you're interested in. And it comes across that way, that's perfectly fine. But if it comes across that you want to work with NGOs, you want to be an advocate, whatever, and you're not particularly interested, obviously it wouldn't come across that way quite, but just to sort of overemphasize the point, um, that you're not particularly interested in learning what we have to teach you, then it's probably not going to go very far here. So it really it would really help in a case like this. I mean, all the sort of the interviews with people shows a certain persistence, go-getterness, and that's all to the good. In fact, the student I was talking about earlier, I mentioned earlier, she was a journalism student. She wrote for the Brown Daily Herald, the school newspaper, and I think that shows in her application that's the kind of the attributes of a sort of writer and reporter, the persistence, the sort of hard-nosed, was a good thing. But that's not going to get by itself or going to get her into an economics graduate program. What it's going to require is like, I really see that in order to do this work properly, I need to have the tools of economics. I need to understand inference. I need to understand how to collect data. I need to do this, that, and the other thing, right? And so having a passion is great. Showing that you've been able to bring to completion some high profile stuff is great, but don't overemphasize that relative to, you're the sort of person, who really, who sort of understands what economics is, and you want to actually come and learn from real economists.
Thank you. I think we have one question from Aditi. She's asking, what is the potential research or what is the potential? Okay, sorry. Let me just rephrase that. She's asking that if research publication is not important, and then what is the signal for a good application? Is it the score in the MA or is it the SOP?
It's everything, right? I mean, I think that that's what I want to give you a sense of. It's that we try to look at every application holistically, and so weaknesses in one part of the application can be compensated for, with other things. So um, so yeah, I don't think it's really helpful to think about it that way. In some sense, the answer is whatever is going to be important to you is whatever is the strongest part of your application. Um, if your strongest part is your Math GRE score, well, that's fine. If your strongest part is that you've done real research and that has an economics flavor, or you have a narrative of how that, of sort of how you followed an idea, and so forth, and that's the strongest part, then that's what I would highlight. We really are not looking for one type of person and one set of GRE scores. In fact, I was looking. Someone asked me to present a plot of. I think I may have sent this to you already. The sort of GRE scores for applicants and admittees, and of course our admittees on average have higher GRE scores than our applicants, right? We do self-select in that direction. But at the very top of the distribution, there's actually a crossover, okay? That we do not accept 100% of the people with perfect math GRE scores, right? In fact, there's a lower fraction of those because we're looking for balance. We're looking for that, but we're also looking for the other things. And one way of thinking about that is, the people who have, the most fantastic GRE scores, the best personal statements, letter writers from Nobel Prizes, and so forth, we'll admit them, but they're not going to come here likely, right? So in the end, every application is going to have some weaknesses and strengths, and our job is to pick out the strengths and make sure the weaknesses aren't too bad. And so that's why we really tend to look for balance rather than trying to be sort of focused on one thing or the other.
Okay, thank you. There are no other questions in the pipeline right now, but if there are other questions people want to ask, the floor is open. Okay. All right. So I guess that's all. I don't know if you have any closing remarks, Andrew, for everyone. and
Well,
but of encouragement.
yeah,
to
no, I mean, I wish you all well. I think if you're passionate about studying economics, I want you to be an economist, and it's a competitive process, and we do make mistakes. I had one of my undergraduates applied to 13 programs one year. He was rejected from all 13. The next year he applied, he got into 6 of them, and now he went to UCLA and he has a faculty position at a very reputable university. So, I'm not saying that happens to everybody. I think that's more evidence of, sometimes you can put together the best application, it doesn't work out. You could try again. Wouldn't keep trying forever, but sometimes that's the case if you really do have a strong application. I think, I guess I wanted to say one other thing. Probably I should have said that sometimes I get letters from admissions people sort of emailing me and saying, look at my file, tell me whether I should apply to Brown. Okay. I never respond to those. I'm very happy to do these kinds of items, or I respond to them. I said, I just can't. Right. We have 750 applications. If I did this for all 750 people, I would do nothing else. Right. So, don't do that. Right. Talk to the faculty who have experience with this process, but then apply. Once you've actually formally applied, I will read your application very carefully and try to come to a decision. But beyond that, I want to be welcoming. I recognize that many of you are going to be at a disadvantage in various sorts of ways, and our job is to dig through the 750 applications and find people who are going to be unique and are going to be good economists and are going to be a credit to our program. And my personal view is that I'm talking to some of them right now. The very fact that you're part of this program tells me that you might well be the sort of person who would actually contribute to our field in an important way. So there's a lot of discouragement. Some of you will not make it, I'm sure. But some of you that I'm talking to know I think will make it and be successful in a top economics program. So it's worth a shot. I hope that this has been helpful to you. If Arushi has particular questions, you can probably contact her. She's obviously has all of your interests at heart, and if she asks me questions, I will definitely answer her, and she can distribute them accordingly.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I think there's one last thing. Aditi has another question. She was raising her hand.
Hi, I'm so sorry for asking it after your ending note. Just wanted to understand how admissions are going to be affected this year and coming years because of pandemic. And would you suggest that it's a good idea to apply next year or coming year and not this year?
Yeah, I'm. I sort of addressed it a little bit at the beginning. I don't think there's any reason not to apply this year if you're otherwise ready to apply. I think next fall should be a fairly regular situation. The classes will be somewhat smaller, be a little bit more competitive this year, but I don't think that should be a sort of decisive issue. Frankly, I mean, I don't want to get too political here, but we were quite concerned with the administration that is on its way out about what they were doing with U.S. student visas. We think that problem will be nipped in the bud with the new administration, and I'm extraordinarily thankful about that.
Yes, all of us are. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for agreeing to speaking with us and taking the time out for this. This is the kind of encouragement that I wish I had when I was applying to. But grateful that we can finally come together and talk about these things. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming in today.
All right.
I